Dr. Albert Husker threw his cards on the table, revealing a royal flush. He laughed flauntingly as he pulled his ill-gained chips closer to him. He enjoyed a good game of poker at the casino, but enjoyed a winning game of poker even more. Of course, he experienced plenty of wins thanks to his masterful sleight of hand and proficiency in manipulation. The doctor stood up and left the table, ready to cash in his chips for the night, when he spotted a dealer sitting at an empty table out of the corner of his eye. He didn't know what it was, but there was something about this dealer's ear-to-ear grin that pulled Albert in. Unable to resist the temptation, he approached the dealer. As he got closer, he noticed the dealer was wearing a red suit and carried a cane with him. Albert sat at the table, and immediately the dealer began speaking. He said he wanted to make a deal. If Albert could beat him in a game of poker fair and square, he would be showered with unimaginable riches, much more than he could ever win through gambling. However, if Albert lost, the dealer would have his soul. Confident that he would win, and sort of brushing off forfeiting his soul, the doctor agreed. Luckily for him, Albert was more than capable of rigging the game in his favor. After being dealt the cards, Albert saw his hand was less than favorable, and was about to pull better cards from his shoe when a ghostly green chain came up from the floor and closed around his wrist. Albert tried to pull it off, but another chain appeared and did the same to his other wrist. Shocked, he looked back at the dealer, whose face had become more grotesque and monstrous. Fire circled around the two, and both him and the dealer were transported to hell. In hell, the dealer, who revealed themselves to be the devil Malabalastar, began to take the doctor's tainted soul. Now it was Albert's turn to make a deal. As a form of repentance for trying to cheat the devil dealer, Albert could get his soul back by finding more souls for Malabalastar to take. Albert tried to hide his surprise when the devil accepted and sent him back to Earth. Now just a soulless husk, Albert must find a way to swindle the folks of New Orleans into giving up their souls, lest he be dragged back to hell to become Malabalastar's plaything for all eternity. We're starting off strong because I think this might be one of my favorite fusions I've done in this whole series, mostly because of how I was able to implement more than 3 characters into the design. I approached this episode a little differently than I did the last 3 parts of this series, in where I did a little bit of character research and looked up what their stories were before going into the design, instead of doing the design first, doing all the story research after, and just kind of figuring out how they'll work together. And because of that, I found out about Dr. Facilier's sentient shadow that accompanies him throughout the movie. And I knew that utilizing that, I could include more than just 3 characters into this design, though it didn't really come up much in the story. And it worked out really well specifically for Keith David because Keith David was a voice actor that a couple of people suggested in the comments. However, all the comments had different combinations of characters. So I wanted to make sure that I took into account all the characters that everyone was suggesting, rather than just taking the voice actor as a whole. And so, in addition to Husk, Dr. Facilier, and Spawn, and the main design, I used the shadow that Dr. Facilier has, and also included Grimlock and Goliath from Transformers and Gargoyles, respectively. And I think it was also a really good switch up of kind of not making the entire piece focused on the character and just having like this other part of it come in. So instead of just the character taking up the whole screen, it's now sort of this scene going on, and I think it looks really cool. Also, choosing to do the green fire coming out of the cards also creates the light source that is almost casting the shadow. It's not perfect, as the shadow's coming from his feet and scaling up the wall, but keeping that lighting consistent of the green fire coming from lighting underneath the face, and then also a light coming from the front to cast the shadow on the back of the head or the back of the wall, it really creates this creepy, sinister element. Like, The main three characters was creepy enough with the underlighting and the flaming cards, but the addition of the shadow just makes it such a more horror, mystical, demonic element to it that I love so much. But overall, like, this was an easy fusion to do, just because there was so much overlap between the design elements. We had Husk and Dr. Facilier with the top hats, the card motifs, and the sort of magic per se, but that's really all three of them, because Spawn has the Hellfire powers and all that. Dr. Facilier has friends on the other side, and Husk has a whole bunch of things like magic, the kinetic energy stuff similar to Gambit, and overall, like, even the color combination between Dr. Facilier, Husk, and Spawn were quite similar, with the blacks and reds with a little bit of white here and there. So everything just really came together for this design, and thank you so much for the suggestion. I wouldn't have thought of doing this had you not suggested it. But let's take a look at our first one. Keith David using Husk, Spawn, Dr. Facilier, Goliath, and Grimlock. "500 years is a long time to be alive, and in that time, one's personality could change drastically. Long ago, Kominka worked as a child's defense attorney, doing her best to protect children from harm in the courtroom. In love with being in the spotlight, Kominka often got carried away with theatrics, leading to a childlike temper and occasionally clumsy verdicts that she didn't intend to make. Anytime the attention she received was in a negative light, though, she would freeze up and stutter her way through the rest of the case. Overall, though, Kominka was loud and excitable. Unfortunately, Kominka's flair for the dramatic had caused her bosses to reach a tipping point and lay her off. As she was walking home in silent shock, she was confronted by a mysterious glowing being. The being introduced themselves as Hendano, and they needed Kominka. A prophecy had foretold of a dangerous man who would go on to kill 5 children and then stuff them into animatronics. Before Kominka could argue, Hendano cast a spell that divided up their soul and body, and placed the pieces of them inside Kominka, turning her into an animatronic herself. Not only that, but she also found herself on stage of a decrepit family pizza place. Hendano explained that Kominka would be a walking security camera. They had given her access to a criminal database and facial recognition. All she had to do was stand on the stage and keep watch for any suspicious individuals, as well as periodically checking in on the security guard each night. With no choice, Kominka kept watch for nearly 5 full centuries, standing still in that abandoned building, watching security guards at night, none of whom matched the criminal database. Eventually, Hendano came back and reversed the curse, returning Kominka to her normal state. However, the 500 years of solitude damaged Kominka's love for the spotlight. When she returned to working in the courtroom, she found she would freeze completely and start to shake whenever she tried to say anything. The only way she'd be able to communicate with anyone during a trial was through writing in a notebook. The only hope she had for regaining her love for theatrics in the courtroom was a man who took notice of Kominka's communicative disorder and wanted to help. Before we get into the design notes for this one, I want to apologize for 2 things. One, I did change up the character suggestions in the comments slightly. I'd like to make sure that any suggestion that you put in the comments, I'm using the exact voice actress/actor and all the characters you provided. However, in order to make a better fusion design, I switched out Risa with Toy Chica because I felt like Komi and Risa were just a little too similar and plainclothes that it'd be difficult to include both of them into the design. Going off of that, however, I'm really sorry for this monstrosity. I'm not gonna lie, looking into the characters you suggested for Amber Lee Connors, the amount of detail in Farina's character design made going into this piece a little daunting. whenever I see a lot of detail that I have to draw, I'm like, I don't know if I'll be able to do it justice and replicate it. But overall, I'm really happy with how it turned out. I did struggle a bit to come up with a pose because it was hard to find a balance between Furina's theatrics and Komi's shyness. They're complete polar opposites. I did end up leaning more with a theatrical pose, but one that's a little more reserved. So instead of like holding hands out for the world to see and taking up more space, it's like a little more inward, like pointing to your chest. Of course, the other arm is outstretched, but I went with the more theatrical side of it because I also plan to do like a secondary face in the corner to kind of show the characters in a monologue. And I was going to use the designs from Komi Can't Communicate, where Komi is just like, has these huge eyes and is trembling whenever she tries to speak. And I tried to also combine that with the toy Chica design, where Chica is missing her beak. And that became a cursed nightmare. Overall, between this entire episode, one thing I'm really proud of is the difference in body types between all three drawings. As I've mentioned before, I'm still new to trying to draw female anatomy. It's much more of a unknown territory for me than male anatomy is. But throughout the last few episodes, I've gotten a lot more practice with it, and I'm really happy with overall how this one turned out as like a sort of culmination between all those last few videos coming together and being like, here's what I've learned, even if it was all just subconscious. Overall, I just think I'm getting a better understanding of anatomy, which is I'm really happy about. Aside from the color palette I used, I feel like that comes together really nicely. The staff is definitely my favorite part of this. I've been using the symmetry tool more to aid in my design process, and using it in this case really helped give the staff its mystical or magical feel to it. Although, when it came to the line art, I didn't actually use the symmetry tool to do the line art for the staff, because I had already put it at an angle and messed up the angle of the original layer I did, so I kind of went into it, and it's a little imperfect, but I don't think it's imperfect enough to tell. Despite it being a cursed nightmare at the start, I'm really happy with how this fusion came out. So let's take a final look at Amber Lee Connors, Toy Chica, Komi Shoko, and Furina. Nero Hinata, or simply Patient Number 9, was meant to be the ultimate being, a human with every talent and ability, created to instill hope into all of mankind. Nero's world was not new to extraordinary abilities. A heavy percentage of the population had powerful gifts and were referred to as ultimates. A school in Japan known as Ultimate Academia would seek out the best of these ultimates and teach them how to hone and utilize their powers in order to fight off the armies of hell that were constantly pouring into their world. Ultimate Academia had quite a strict acceptance policy and only accepted a handful of ultimates into their hero course each year. It wasn't long before the school's costs vastly outweighed their income. As a solution, Ultimate Academia began to offer reserve courses to students who weren't ultimates, increasing the amount of revenue the school was bringing in. While most of the money went back into the Ultimates hero courses, a portion of the money was being used for secret experimentation. The Academia heads were researching the abilities and talents of all the ultimates that came through the school, in hopes of creating the ultimate being, a single person imbued with every ultimate talent and ability. A godlike being who could defeat the demons and inspire hope. It was known as the Archangel Project. Unfortunately, they needed someone who was completely devoid of any talent or ability to undergo the testing. The main reason for the Ultimate Academia's reserve course. Nero was one of the students in the reserve course, and despite being talentless, adored the opportunities that the Academia had given him. As his health was rapidly deteriorating, Nero made sure to make the most of whatever time he had. Nero was approached by faculty members of Ultimate Academia to participate in the project due to his love of the school. He agreed to participate, believing the experiment would give him the means of healing and living a long and fruitful life. However, during the procedure, things didn't go as planned. Some of the talents that were being implemented into Nero were tainted, and while on the operating table, his right arm began to glow and mutate. Nero awoke to a trashed operating room. He didn't feel different, but it didn't take long for him to notice that his right arm was rough and scaly. The procedure hadn't worked as the Academia Committee intended, but Nero now had demonic powers at his fingertips. Despite a newfound boredom for life that came with the immense power, Nero went up against the demon armies, boosting the morale of generations of Ultimates. So, I don't know which is harder, fusing characters that I might not know from your comments, or trying to choose 3 characters to fuse on my own based on your suggestions, especially if the voice actor has so many roles. This piece that I've done is by far the most detailed of the 3, and quite possibly in the entirety of this voice actor fusion series. The 3 characters I chose to work with in this fusion, as voiced by Yong Bosch, were Hajime Hinata / Izuru Kamakura from the Danganronpa series, Nero from Devil May Cry series, and 9 from the My Hero Academia movie Heroes Rising. And design-wise, they all work together very well, especially 9's torso and Nero's Devilbringer arm. There's something about the combination of those blues and purples and those dark grays that tie them together and make them look cybernetic and demonic at the same time, which feeds both into 9 and Nero's design. Like, if you look at the chest first and then the arm, it's like, oh yeah, it's got like a superhero cyber kind of feel to it. But if you look at the arm first and then the chest, it's like, oh yeah, it's like dark and demonic, and it's weird how it can be both at the same time. Admittedly, Hajime or Izuru is the least represented in the fusion design-wise, even though he gets his chance to shine within the story. The character hair taking up so much of the piece, it almost doesn't matter that that's the only part of Hajime or Izuru that got into the design, just because it's such a big part of the piece. Adding in any more would have felt like I was tipping the scales in Hajime's favor. And the way I chose to shade it, like very harshly down the middle, the darker side of his hair looks like the original color of Izuru's hair is coming in, so there's even that added element into it. Even though I did talk about it in the last piece, I am a little unsure about the anatomy in this piece. I feel like the designing of the torso, the patterns on it, distracted me a little bit from doing a proportioned torso and abdomen area. But I'm really happy with the amount of detail in this piece, and the shading, the way I chose to shade it, makes that anatomy really hard, like the anatomy discrepancies, a little hard to see. So if you're just looking at the final piece, I don't think it would be as noticeable. However, I do regret the way I shaded it because it blocked out the gun a lot, and guns are tricky to draw, and especially if there's like a hand holding them a certain way. So I'm really, really happy with how the gun turned out, and I'm a little sad that it ended up being on the dark side of the character. Like I mentioned in the last one, when it comes to a lot of detail, especially more natural detail where it's like scales and rocks and stuff like that, I never know how I'm gonna tackle them, but doing a sketch out of how I wanted it to look out before I went into the final rendering, and of course trusting the process, I got a scaly and rocky texture that I was hoping for without having to meticulously put in every single scale and rock. But let's take a look at our final drawing of the episode. Yong Bosch with Hajime Hinata / Izuru Kamakura, Nero, and 9. Every episode of this series just gets better and better. This is now my new favorite. I love the designs across the board on this one. It's just so good. Thank you all so much for suggestions, and please keep them coming because it's so much fun to do this series. Like I said, I love doing fusion art, and honestly, it's just inspiring as somebody who wants to be a voice actor to see the range of characters that all these people have. So, if you enjoyed the video, feel free to like and subscribe button. It really lets me know that you want to see more of these, because I know I do. And I also want to try something a little different today. Down below in the comments, vote which of these pieces you think fits the following categories: best shading and rendering, best overall fusion design, and best story. And a piece can be nominated for more than one of those categories. If you ever played the Mario Party games, it's very similar to how the bonus stars work, where extra awards are given outside of the main game based on your performance in the game. In this case, the game would be me drawing them. And in next week's video, I will announce which piece won which award, as well as reading some of your comments on what you thought about the pieces. So we'll give it a try. We'll test the waters, see how this new idea kind of works, and carry on from there. And if you like this video, then I highly recommend the 3 other voice actor fusions we've got on the channel, with 9 other voice actors and actresses that I highly recommend you check out. The playlist for that will be up here, and other stuff will be down here as always. That's all I've got for you today. My name is KyngPin, and I will see you all in the next video. Take care, everyone.